The Illuminate Arts and Faith Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee wants to help you find your tribe. Do you get way too excited about quoting Wendell Berry or C.S. Lewis in conversations with coworkers? Does your Spotify playlist include hymns, a little jazz, and a whole lot of Andrew Peterson? Join your tribe at Illuminate March 31 and April 1 for education and inspiration from speakers Russ Ramsey, Douglas McKelvey, John Hendricks, and others. Find a complete list of session topics and ticket information at southern.edu/illuminate.
In 2024, I set out to meet as many poets as I could and spend an hour with each one. I got more than I bargained for, more insight, more clarity, more hope. It's proved to be one of the richest highlights of my life. 17 writers, 17 deeply human conversations that made me sit up and pay attention. Franz Kafka once said, if the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. And that's what I hope this new book will do. I hope it wakes us up, my friends. I hope these conversations will be the catalyst for something to be reawakened, re-enchanted, and reinvigorated. It's called An Axe for the Frozen Sea, Conversations with Poets About What Matters Most. I'm Ben Palpin, and I hope you'll come and listen in as I spend a little time with poets like Lucy Shaw, Malcolm Guite, Dana Gioia, and Lee Young Lee. Pull up a chair at the table as we dig into what it means to write well and to live well. An Axe for the Frozen Sea is now available from Rabbit Room Press. Visit the store at rabbitroom.com, or better yet, ask about it at your favorite bookseller.
I like being on the margins. I like hovering on the horizon in my little gleam. So I did my work, and it was celebrated and received in a lot of times by people far from the faith world. And that was really the first time where I felt seen in that intersection of my deep faith and my love of Jesus and my mission, which is to create stories that will lead me into the world outside the church and bring me into the hearts and minds, my stories into the hearts and minds of kids like me who were not growing up inside the church.
Welcome to the Habit Podcast, conversations with writers about writing. I'm Jonathan Rogers, your host. Mitali Perkins has always thought of herself as an outsider writing for outsiders, and yet she has a remarkable gift for inviting people in. She has 2 new books out. Hope in the Valley is a middle grade novel, and Holy Night and Little Star is a picture book for Christmas. Mitali Perkins, I am so happy to have you on the Habit Podcast today.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. It's great to be back talking with you.
Yeah, we've got lots to talk about. Your latest book is Holy Night and Little Star, A Story for Christmas, a beautiful picture book about the star that shone over Bethlehem. And not, was it October that Hope in the Valley came out? Was it that recently?
No, it's been July. It was out in July.
So, yeah. So let's see where to start. I'd love to start with Hope in the Valley. Yeah. Tell us what's your little pitch for this book? When people ask you what that book's about, what do you tell them?
It's about change. It's about, and both of the books actually are feature characters that are resistant to change. One is a picture book, one's a middle grade novel, but I've had adults read the book, and hopefully it crosses over to adults as well. It's a bit of a memoir in that it's about a girl growing up in the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area, in the 1980s. Mm-hmm. And so it's a time of great change in Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley was moving from being called the Valley of Heart's Delight, where orchards flourished and people came from all over to see the fruit and the flowers, to becoming the Silicon Valley sprawl that we know today. The land was changing. And so here we have a girl, Pandita Paul, who's 12 going on 13, which I know that you know as a parent, especially of girls, that is a time of great change. Yeah. She has 2 older sisters, like I did. She didn't want to grow up. I did not want to grow up. And she pens a lot of poetry. She goes across the street to an orchard, an old orchard, an apricot orchard, and she pens poetry and letters, which is what I did. So in fact, in the book, got to co-write with 12-year-old Mitali and put the poems that I wrote when I was 12 into the story. So she's a lot like me, quiet, introspective, reads a ton, and does not want to grow up. And yet, so the land itself is changing, and the girl in the story is also, you can't stop time. In fact, she writes a poem called The Thief of Time because she so wants to go back to earlier years, but she can't. And the town, too, is clinging to the past, but has to move to the future as well.
Yeah. Did The Thief of Time, is that a Little Mitali poem?
Yes.
It is.
It's Jonathan. It's funny because here I am, an immigrant from India, right? And I grew up in California. And so I wrote this really dramatic poem called Ode to a Winter Tree. And I never grew up with winter trees. But it was just this idea that this sad time when you had to let go of all your blossoms and your foliage. I know. And, here I am at the stage of life now where I am my blossoms and foliage are leaving. It's a sweet poem to think about writing that when you're 12 and reading that now as at this stage of life.
Tell me about what it's like to go back to poems that you wrote when you were that little, and was it cringy, or was it just, did you have a lot of compassion for 12 or 13-year-old Mitali? I'd love to hear you talk about that.
It was in this old notebook. I think what it did is it brought me back into the moment of actually writing the poetry and feeling those emotions and, the stress of immigrant life and all the ways that stories and words were strengthening me and giving me solace, and my own words and the words I was taking in from other writers. That's how I survived that crazy time when our family, my parents were refugees, started life here, fresh off the boat. They were from the village, educated, but from the village. Yeah. So there's a lot of tension in our home, and the stories, the words gave me so much solace that it actually gave me solace again reading them. Of course they're cringy, my poetry today is cringy. So, but it's interesting because my voice, I even wrote little stories back then, and voice is something, we've both taught writers. Voice is something that you can't really teach.
Yeah.
Something that, and I had my same voice, my same authorial voice was in that early work as today. It was very similar. So it's weird. Decades.
That is so interesting.
Yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah.
Yes. And compassion, but it was weird because I felt more like little Mitali was giving compassion into old Mitali.
Really?
Yeah, like that way instead of.
What does that mean? What do you mean when you say that?
Just as I said, the solace of the poetry and the words and the play. When you're a professional writer, as I am, you can lose the freshness of it. It's my job. It's my full-time job.
Yeah.
So, and all those voices of the adult voices that get in your head about all the opposition to your writing, that comes in your head. Well, I didn't have that back then. I just had words and play and stories and poetry and the solace that it gave me to create. So in that way, I felt that little Mitali was offering me that invitation again to come back to the roots of my love of writing, my love of words, and the great joy it gives me when I find the right word. In the story, she's changing one word, and she's toying with just one verb and one noun. I did that back then. As I understood the weight of one noun and one verb. And so it gave me sort of a call to play again with the craft. So that's how it was compassionate.
Yeah. Do you know how it was that you, as a person that young, knew to be literary? I mean, you said your parents were educated. Were they reading a lot of books to you?
Well,
were you unusual for your family?
My father was a great storyteller, and we've talked about that last time about that legacy of storytelling.
Yeah.
He was hilarious, Jonathan. He had us laughing. There would be some catastrophe in our house, like I don't know, the heater would flood, and within 5 minutes we were all just, that shared belly laugh that you get when you're with kin or with good friends. We were just so laughter was a great connector for our family. But it was basically because of my dad's stories. And then he told stories of his childhood. They were all mythical stories about near-death experiences with crocodiles and cobras and things. But we were always enthralled. And then he had us memorize poetry. So we memorized the great works of. He loved Wordsworth. So he had us when people would come to our house. He would have me stand on a little stool and recite, "I wandered lonely," and I had a little British accent then, "as a cloud that floats on high." I mean, he loved that. But also Rabindranath Tagore, who is our Nobel laureate poet from Bengal. Oh my goodness, Dad loved his words, and he would recite poetry all the time. So yeah, that. But then we didn't have many books because, as I said, my parents lost everything in the war. So it was always like, go to library, go to library. So I would go every week, 7 books, and that was the limit back then. Yeah. And I think my parents knew early on. I started reading early. I think they sensed early on that I loved reading. So my father would make it a point to take me to the library, and my sister, because they could see what joy it gave me. But as a career, that was not their dream for me.
Yeah,
to be
right.
A full-time writer. But of course, they became so proud of me now. But but it was just clear that I was drawn to words from age of 3.
Yeah.
On. I loved words. I just loved both Bangla words and English words.
Yeah. How many languages were you speaking when you were little?
Well, Bengali is our mother tongue, and it's actually I think it's the 4th most commonly spoken mother tongue in the world, because there's many of us in the diaspora as well, Bangladesh and West Bengal. And it's a beautiful language. It has a lot of rich literary tradition. In fact, the stereotype for Bengalis in India is that we love to sit around, tell jokes, and write sad poetry. That's sort of our stereotype, because we've done a lot of that. The national anthem of India is in Bangla. There's 26, I think, major languages in India, different. So Bengali was one, and then I lived all around the world, so I learned very quickly. One of the things about being a lover of words and not being scared of them is that it leads you into other languages with a lot of grace and lack of fear. So everywhere I go, and maybe it's my father, I love to make people laugh because it's my way to connect. Yeah. And so I'm not afraid to become a fool, become the court jester, and make up, say, just so I can say, where's the bathroom in 10 different languages.
Yeah, right.
Just to be lost and to ask questions and to get other people to teach you. Children, get children to teach you their language so that you can make them laugh and giggle at you. That is so fun for me. So I can speak a lot of different, I can speak little bits in lots of different languages, but Bangla, English, and Spanish are my 3 that I can
speak. How do Bangla and Spanish, do those languages affect the way you write English and talk and speak English?
That is a great question. I was thinking before our podcast, I just was on another podcast. I heard myself speak and I thought, I speak so quickly. So I was telling myself, Jonathan has a nice slow cadence. You slow down, lady, because I talk a mile a minute. I just talk so fast. I could be an auctioneer, Jonathan. Sold. Yeah. So I think that I think quickly in my brain, and words, I think probably gets me in trouble because my language part of my brain is in my mouth. That's not always good. But the Spanish and the Bangla, the Spanish is interesting. Here I am in California. So speaking Spanish is a huge advantage, and I'm brown. So I look like I should be able to speak it well. And I have a good accent because I learned it as a child. We lived in Mexico a couple of years. I start speaking and then I quickly run out of words. And so the little abuelitas will be like, ¿Por qué olvidas tu lengua? Why have you forgotten your language? Like, no, soy de la India. And they're always like, oh, de la India, but you speak Spanish well. And then I get the little kudos, So yeah, I think there's a cadence to Bangla that's very sing-song and very fast. And I'm sure that affects my spoken English because usually I have to speed up podcasts, because it's slow for me. So I always listen at 1.75.
1.75?
Well, listen to audio. I get nothing. I probably retain nothing at that speed. Right. But it sounds so slow to me. And when I was just in Nashville and It's like, wow, people take a long time. People take a long time to say what they need to say down here.
Yeah.
Which is really sweet. It's good for me to slow it down. So I love it.
Well, okay. So it's so interesting to think, there are memoirish elements to Hope in the Valley, and you're writing on you're sitting in, do you live in Silicon Valley? Is that where you live, count in Silicon Valley?
I live in the East Bay. Silicon Valley is the South Bay, but I went to college. I went to college down there.
Yeah.
So it's only about 45 minutes away.
Yeah. So, on the other side of all that change as you're describing, both geographically and personally, and you're looking back on this. I mean, that the Valley of Heart's Delight is just such a beautiful name, and I just want to go there. And that's such a story of California. This thing that used to be orchards and bees buzzing around, and now is so built up.
Right. And so the inciting incident in that book is that beautiful orchard where she would go to write letters to her mother, who's no longer on earth. Is the inciting incident is that her sister, who works for an affordable house, who volunteers for an affordable housing nonprofit, comes rushing in to her birthday dinner, to Pandita's birthday dinner, and says, "Guess what? Great news. The orchard across the street is going to be demolished and put on sale." And see, her family doesn't know that she's been sneaking in there to write. They don't know. It's her secret place. Yeah. And so she's just devastated. Like, this space she used to go and meet with her mom and write letters is now going to be gone. And so there's a historical preservation society that wants to save the land and the orchard because of the beautiful history of California's orchards. And so Pandita decides to join with them to try to save. So now her sister and her are on opposite sides because they want to see some affordable middle-class housing on that land, right? And it taps into the roots of our problem here in California, where cities and towns didn't think about how we would need that kind of housing.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of that, but then it's Pandita's. The front of the book has a picture of her with her hair in braids, and that's her signature hairstyle, right? She wears her hair in a braid, and I didn't know what the theme of the book is until I did a school visit. I didn't know how to express the theme of the book, and the school visit, and someone said, "Well, what do you think of the cover?" And I said, "Oh, I like it." And then a girl, she was 8th grade, raised her hand and said, "I know why they put those braids on the cover." And I said, "Huh, really? Tell me." And she said, "Well, it's because Pandita is weaving together the past and the future and the present into a braid. And that's why her braid." And I thought, oh my gosh, you're right.
Wow.
It really is the mystery of a story, how a reader takes it and takes meaning out of it that I didn't even know I was doing with that metaphor braid, right?
Yeah, that's so good. And you've been doing this long enough to not be shocked by that, that you do your thing and then the readers do their thing. And even something like theme, I think that's more the reader's business.
Absolutely.
The writer's business.
Yes, Jonathan. Absolutely right. I read like that. I did not like, because I had 2 bossy older sisters, I didn't like being bossed around in literature. And I think that's probably why you love Flannery O'Connor so much, because there's room for the reader, right? And it's one of my missions as a teacher of writing and as a writer, and especially as a writer of faith, to honor that relationship over a story, and really to leave as much room as you can for the reader, especially a child reader, right? I write for children mostly, young people.
I want to return to the 2 sisters in conflict. And I really appreciate the fact that both of these sisters, they're in conflict, not because one is right and one is wrong. Both are pursuing goods. And I think that's so important in storytelling to put 2 goods in opposition to one another, not just good and evil. I shouldn't say every, but that's most tragedy is not the struggle between good and evil. It's the struggle between people who are trying to do the right thing and come into conflict with one another, or who have legitimate claims on the same thing and come into conflict with one another. I don't know if you have more to say about that, but that just kind of stuck out to me when you were talking about the sisters.
Wow, that's exactly right. And thank you for putting it in that beautiful way. I felt I wanted to explore the roots of our problem with housing in a more nuanced way. And often my books come at issues like this with a lot of nuance. I will never vilify a character. I try never to vilify a character that has an opposing viewpoint to myself, because I feel it's deep work I do as a writer to try to move toward compassion for somebody who disagrees with me politically, spiritually, emotionally. And so in this book, I do have a lot of nuanced characters. There's actually 3 factions. There's people who want to save the land. There's people who want to use the land for affordable housing. And then there's people who want it just to be a rural, big parcel homes, like where just as they enjoy their life, they don't want to change it. They like an acre of land with one home on it. And that's what all the other houses are like. And this is our community. And so, they're resisting either affordable housing or historical preservation because they want, and then I have a community like that. It's semi-rural, and we have a lot of those discussions. And so I worked really hard on knowing each character that I wanted to represent, each point of view. And sometimes my books get critiqued for that because people want me to be polarizing. People want me to be not compassionate toward a character they disagree with. I wrote a picture book about our border fence between California and Mexico. And it's a story of a family who's separated by that border fence. So of course, yes, I want compassion for that family. But the pivotal moment in that story comes when a child's piece of art changes the mind of a border patrol officer. And so I got heat from both sides for that book. There were people that thought that book was just too, for lack of a better horrible word, I hate the word woke now, but they thought the book was too one-sided on that side because I was trying to gender compassion for families who are separated by the border. On the other side, I got people who were like, why did you write a border patrol officer who was compassionate? That cannot be. And so, and then whenever I get heat for a lot of my books because I try to do that nuanced good versus good, right? Yeah. And so, but as my husband always says, when I get heat from both sides, he's always like, good job, honey.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. But I get so tired of the stories, which there's the bad, faceless corporate, whatever, and then the virtuous, especially on questions of land use. I mean, it's surprising how many movies talk about land use, but not in subtle ways. And so,
and the subtlety is what I miss so much in storytelling. It's really our realm, right? We don't, and yet it's gotten so heavy-handed because on both sides of the coin, there's heavy-handed didactic storytelling, especially for children.
Yeah,
and that I feel this fire in my belly about that. It doesn't honor the child reader. It doesn't honor the way that a child wants to approach a story. It actually is a betrayal of story when you take it and use it as a vehicle for your own political. And of course, it's going to come through. Like D.H. Lawrence made the case that every story is political, every story is didactic, but you have to do the work of character building. That you have to have compassion for your characters to understand why does this old geezer want to hold on to the land? Yeah. And if you understand the backstory of that old geezer and what the land means to them, you can have them come into that town hall and have him be as ornery as all, whatever. But you understand his backstory, and that compassion allows you to create that subtlety in the story. So it's one of my pet peeves.
Yeah. Well, I love stories about California. California is such an interesting place. I'm glad you're writing about it. How many of your books have been set in California?
My goodness, that's a good question. Let's see. So there was Between Us and Abuela, which is the picture book I talked about. Then there's this one, Hope in the Valley. My first one, of course, my first novel which was written. I don't know, your listeners were probably in their cradles when I wrote that one. And then there was 12 years of rejection between book one and book two. So a lot of them, I love a sense of place. I love a rich sense of place. And I have a sense of place in different parts of the world where I've lived, like India, Bangladesh. But when it comes to California, it's really in my bones. We came here when I was 11 and settled here, and I began to walk my hills, my oak studded hills around here, and I took in the smells. The five senses setting of California shaped me and formed me, almost like another auntie, So the Auntie California, that sense of place is rich inside me. And so it will come out of my stories and my poems and things.
No, okay. I love it. Well, I want to talk about Holy Night and Little Star. So that was an abrupt change. But I don't know how else to get there, but just say, I want to talk about this book for a little while. So here we are.
Hey, let's do it. I had two books come out back to back, and I had to hit the road. So I was always doing that dizzy turn. Which book am I talking about?
Yeah. Where? Okay. Well, now we're talking about the other one, the picture book, which, tell me if I'm pronouncing your illustrator's name right. Coalee. She's Vietnamese.
She's Vietnamese. She's a Catholic Vietnamese artist who lives in Vietnam.
She lives in Vietnam. That's what I thought. She made such beautiful illustrations for this. And I loved Little Tree and Mighty Wind to get there.
Their Tree and Little Wind. Yeah, that was another collaboration with Koa.
Yeah. I loved her pictures in that too, but these are just fantastic, of the planets and the stars. And so tell us about this book.
All right. Well, as you know, I'm an outsider, newcomer to the Christian faith. Didn't hear about Jesus till I was 19. Of course, was very much shepherded into the kingdom of Christianity, the realm of Christianity, by Uncle Jack, C.S. Lewis, the Narnia books, and through Mere Christianity. But that, so as an outsider to Christmas, all I heard about was this rounded fellow that was dressed in red and white who came down people's chimneys, not ours, but everyone else's, to get presents, and all the folklore around Christmas and Easter. So I really had a dream for a long time to write an outsider's view of these amazing stories. Once I realized what they really meant, Easter and Christmas, and once I took them into my life narrative, I would try different stories and things. And really, the back in the day when I started writing, the Christian book world was not open to my work. So just there's, like I said, nuance and mystery maybe is not necessarily something that was there for that. So my father, as I said, was a great storyteller, but he was also a lover of nature. And wherever we went, he would always encourage us to be attentive. And even though I speak fast, when I'm outside in nature and solitude, I take it in very slowly and deeply, because my father taught us to see, to the Elizabeth Barrett Browning taking off our shoes. He did that for us. And so when I began to approach Christmas and Easter, I wanted to approach it from the perspective of the created order. What was the created order doing when these great events were happening in human history? And so with Bear Tree and Little Wind, I take the perspective of a palm tree and a little wind, and how did the trees and the wind approach this great moment in human history, and how could I approach them from using them to bring my outsider's perspective in? So with Holy Night and Little Star, there's the galaxies, right? And so in this book, Maker, as I call God, is inviting the galaxy to participate in a holy night. And here we have Little Star, who likes to hover on the horizon, slow and low, and doesn't want to change. Just shine for the little baby lambs. That's all she loves to do. And now Maker is talking about a big night that's going to change everything. And Little Star is not sure she wants to have anything to do with that. And so when Maker gathers the galaxy and says, okay, I'm going to need you to do these, to be part of Holy Night. And he issues these invitations to the stars and the planets, and they're so excited to be a part of this, except for Little Star, who just wants to hover low on the horizon and doesn't want things to change. But then Maker says, little star, and he keeps inviting her. So, picture books have a rule of 3.
Yeah.
So twice Maker invites her to participate in bringing messengers from afar and in joining his holy singers to herald the birth. And each time little star says, no, it's too scary. I don't want to do that. And then the third time he says, now be ready, little star. I have something that's just right for you. And she's still scared. So when Holy Night comes and he invites her she has to decide, will she be a part of it or not? And so she accepts his invitation, and the story unfolds from there. Yeah.
Well, it's such a sweet little book. And I love that idea of we know that creation groans, creation longs to be restored. And so I love the way that you play that out in this story. And that little star learns to be courageous and to fulfill her role in this big drama. So, but such a gorgeous book. I know before we started recording, you got to tell me about some teaching you recently did for a college creative writing class. I'd love to hear you say, we can just repeat that conversation because it was so interesting. So you were a writer in residence at Calvin University in Michigan.
Yes, I was in September the inaugural writer in residence, and the English department invited me to come and teach a class. I had 15 college students, and we were talking about the misery of grading them. I loved every minute of that month in Calvin. I was treated. I mean, my dad is no longer on earth, but he used to look at me like I was the most amazing person he'd ever seen. Every time I walked in the room, his face would light up. And I felt like Calvin did that for me.
Oh, that's great.
This writing gig is a hard gig, and I've been around a long time, and still nobody knows who I am. I'm like a little star. I want to hover on the horizon and do my little. Yeah. But I'll tell you, after my dad left the earth, I thought, well, who's going to see me like that? And husbands are all right, Jonathan, but they don't like, my husband's face doesn't light up like a beacon when I walk in the room. When we brush the teeth together in the morning, it's not like that. So it's everything, which is fine. There's room for that too. But when I walked into Calvin, I just felt seen. I think it's that intersection of what I've tried to do my whole writing life, which is and it's governed by this great quote from Catherine Patterson, where she talks about putting faith in the bones of our stories. In the very bones of it, not putting it on as fancy dress. And I have used that quote as my North Star in my writing. And a lot of times, my stories are not, maybe some of them are faith forward, and some of them I've tried to put how my faith, which is so deep and rich and interior, into the bones of my stories. And a lot of people get that, especially in the faith world. They want me to put it on like fancy dress, and then they'll open the door for me, right? Mm-hmm. So for a lot of times, doors in the faith world were, especially because I'm Indian, I think they just didn't get that I could have anything to say into the world of whatever. Christian world. So I was fine with that. I like being on the margins. I like hovering on the horizon in my little gleam. So I did my work, and it was celebrated and received in a lot of times by people far from the faith world. Mm-hmm. And even Hope in the Valley, which is, it's getting a lot of wonderful reviews from people who have or would have never entered the door of a church, which is such a goal for me to have kids who are outside the church, like I was, receive my stories. And so I think that Calvin invited me because of that mission. Yeah. And that was really the first time where I felt seen in that intersection of my deep faith and my love of Jesus and my mission, which is to create stories that will lead me into the world outside the church and bring me into the hearts and minds, my stories into the hearts and minds of kids like me who were not growing up inside the church. And so Calvin saw that and celebrated that and loved me for that. And I was like, wait, it's the same way that my dad would see me. I felt that's great. It was really beautiful. Yeah.
I love hearing that. I was listening to David Brooks talk about his new book in an interview. And he said one of the questions he has started asking people is, when was the time when you felt seen? And I want to start asking that question of people too,
Right. And it's one of our missions as we get older too, is to see, right? Mm-hmm. me feel, Hagar in the Bible, such an outsider, right? And she gives God his first name, the first time he's named by a human being. And, I don't know if you remember what she calls him. Yeah, you are the one who sees. You're the God who sees me. And so for people on the margins, that has been a lifelong practice for me. I'm writing a book right now called Just Creativity. And it's kind of letters to young writers, young artists about how to persevere. Uh-huh. And one of the practices I'm going to talk about is the practice, the art of seeing on the margins, turning your eyes toward people with less power, to children, to the elderly, to people who are traditionally unseen, invisible people. It is a brilliant practice to keep informing our creativity and to keep creating and to continue to create fresh new art. So I can't wait to read David Brooks's. I don't know if he has that emphasis in it, the emphasis of seeing to the margins, to the powerless.
Yeah, that's a good.
I don't know if he has or not. I'm curious to see, because it's a lifelong practice of faith for me, and it's one of the ways that I've really. I was just reading in Ezekiel this morning, that stagnant sea, and the river that flows through it and brings fish and fruit for healing.
Yeah.
Practices that will help you as an artist when your sea is stagnant, and that is one of my favorite ones, which is to see the margins of power.
Interesting. Real quickly, you said it gave you a lot of hope, these young writers that you taught? Oh my
goodness. Yes. I think that's exactly, because Calvin invited me because they understand my mission. Mm-hmm. And these students are English department majors. They were upper class mostly. They chose an English major. First of all, oh my gosh, brave, right? So everyone's doing like cybersecurity and artificial intelligence. And here these brave 15 students are like, nope, we're going to declare our major in English. And I'm like, I already love you. I was a political science major. But and then many of them at Calvin come from either missionary families or homeschooled families, especially the ones that chose English, I think. And you could tell, like me, that they had been voracious readers as children, and that their imaginations had been informed by a lot of stories. Because when they wrote for me, and they wrote, I used Save the Cat Writes a Novel as my, they wrote a catalyst scene, they wrote a midpoint scene, and they wrote the darkest moment, the all is lost scene. And they had a chance to write the draft and then revise them after we met one-on-one, after I read their work. And so the drafts were good, they were great. But then, when I gave them feedback, oh my goodness, they took the feedback so humbly, because they cared about craft, right? And they wanted to improve their stories, and they just went to work. And the final scenes were, they got it. Like, they got that intersection of place, people, and plot, that in the moment scenes where you set it in a place and you move the plot forward and you use dialogue. I did some of my hard workshops that are advanced writers. I give for advanced writers, and those kids took it in. I think it's because they were read to. So I had great hope for the next generation of storytellers from my class. And listen, students, if you're listening to this at all, it was so refreshing to work with you. So keep going, keep writing. I loved your work.
All right, Mitali. But I often end with this question. I'd love to hear your answer, because we're running out of time. But who are some writers who make you want to write?
Well, I did write a book called Steeped in Stories.
Yeah.
Which was about my childhood growing up as an avid reader. And I talked about 7 of my rereads. I reread every year in that. And unfortunately, all of the authors in that book are dead. I know you love dead writers too. I don't know. There's something about being spoken to from people who came before, who no longer can speak on earth, but they can speak to you through stories. So in that book, Steeped in Stories, I explore the 7 Christian virtues, and the 3 cardinal virtues, and then the 4 other beautiful virtues that Aquinas sets out for us. Yeah. So I talk about going on a virtue hunt in stories for these 7 virtues. And I set it up with these 7 books. There, of course, there's the classic, the Narnia. I picked The Silver Chair for prudence, with Puddleglum as my personification of prudence. And then Little Women for temperance. And, I look at the vices. So I would encourage people to look at that those 7 virtues. I do that now with contemporary literature as well as classic literature, because my thesis in that book is that every book is flawed. Every creator is flawed. We're having this cultural moment where we're talking about which books, and for our children and for ourselves. And if a creator is flawed, we throw the book out.
Yeah.
And so in this book, I set up this other practice, which I'm going to talk about also in my next book, about virtue seeking and how we can do that with every story. And as a reader, because readers have power over the story, we can leave being in control of the way the story interacts with us. And a multi-storied child, I make the case in that book, most powerful creature on earth. I was a multi-storied child, so no story had power over me. I had power over the stories. And so that's what I encourage readers to do, is cast aside fear as we approach this cultural moment of fear over stories, and lead our children boldly into becoming multi-storied children. So that's what I do. And so go back to your question, I reread seasonally, and you can find all my favorite reads in that book, Steeped in Stories.
All right. Mitali, I love talking to you. It's so fun to spend a little time together. So thanks for being here.
Thank you, Jonathan, for having me back. It's such a privilege and honor. Thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by The Rabbit Room, where art nourishes community and community nourishes art. And all our podcasts are made possible by the generous support of our members. To learn more about us, visit rabbitroom.com. And to become a member, rabbitroom.com/donate.
If you've enjoyed this podcast episode, consider joining the Rabbit Room membership. Your membership helps sustain this community, funding everything from publishing and podcasts and theater productions to events and programs that support artists who create with a Christ-centered vision. We'd love to have you on board. Learn more at rabbitroom.com/member.